order of business would be on our agenda, review of the minutes from February 26th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
There is a motion.
Second?
I make the motion.
I'll second.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Being none, the minutes are approved. So I think we can move to item 2, discussion regarding what specific demographics the committee wants to focus upon. So Judge Knox, do you have any thoughts about how we want to start this discussion?
Yes, obviously we received a lot of information from Director Grealish, who I know is present, and we all needed an opportunity to absorb that information. So I hope everyone has had a chance to look at that. But I will note that we focused in, by Director Grealish, focused in on race and ethnicity with regard to the data. He also informed us at the time that there is other demographic information that is collected from our potential jurors, and that the scope of what we could look at would be much broader than the data that he provided, or could be different than the data he provided with regard to demographics. In response to that, trying to determine what we should be doing, we distributed the task force report. And I don't know if any of you had an opportunity to read it. It was incredibly informative to me to sit back and read the task force report that obviously Judge Wilson was a participant on that task force. And I started to realize that one of the most significant factors we probably need to be looking at are going to be race and ethnicity. I took the task force report and then I did a deeper dive and started reading. Quite frankly, I went back to the State versus Holmes decision. And I just want to remind everyone that when we were originally appointed, I believe you all received the same letter that I received. But when we were appointed to this committee, one of the things that the Chief Justice had noted was that he was giving us a charge, but reminded us that as background to our charge, that we should be looking at the State versus Holmes decision that the Supreme Court announced, I believe it was in 2019, and that the task force should be looking to determine what data is available so that we can, as he put it, ultimately determine if our efforts, in fact, are eradicating racial bias from the jury selection process in Connecticut. So I think he, in his letters of appointment, is also helping us to focus on the demographic issues we should be looking at. So what I want to just make sure is everybody has an opportunity to read all of these materials that we're providing to you so that we can have a full and broad discussion as to what specific demographics we want to focus on. But I think you need to read all these materials. On that note, I've spoken a little too long, but I would invite any other comments or thoughts.
Well, first of all, I fully endorse Judge Knox's perspective on this. I think it is very important that we look at everything because that's the first part of our charge. But it's very clear that race and ethnicity, I think, in the end, is going to be the focus of what we're going to do. So to that end, I think the last time, and I cut out on everybody, and I apologize on that first meeting date, but I think that there were that Judge Wilson and also Director Brown were going to take a look at a couple of items, and I think Mr. Locke is going to be here to address some of those issues. I know there was some material that we already received from Judge Wilson. Did you want to talk now and address some of the points that you raised in that memo, Judge Wilson, at all?
Sure. I don't know if, and I apologize for the late notice of sending the memo, but to everyone, and I hope everyone at least got an opportunity to, if not read it to at least peruse it. But I thought narrowing down the demographics to race and ethnicity might be a little more we may be able to handle it a little better, but it's also consistent with the charge that was articulated in State v. Holmes. So and also the task force report is kind of long, but I focused on this memo, which I think that the data statutes and rules subcommittee is probably the most relevant of all the subcommittees that would aid us and assist us in our charge from the Chief Justice regarding the collection and interpretation of data. So, what I did was you can look at the memo that I sent. I started with the 3 primary recommendations from the Data Statutes and Rules Subcommittee, which I think are relevant to what our charge is, and noting that we as a committee, I think we've already started doing it. The collection of data on the characteristics, of the prospective jurors. If we're going to limit this to, at least our recommendations to race and ethnicity, we've been collecting, I think, on other demographics as well, but we're currently doing that. It's currently being collected, retaining demographic non-personally identifiable data. That's currently being done. And collecting records on for-cause and peremptory challenges that reflect the identity of first chair trial counsel as the party asserting the challenge. That's according to what I reviewed and Mr. Grealish's report. That's also being done. The recommendations of the Data Statutes Committee were that demographics such as race, and I listed white American, Black American, that's also being currently collected. Ethnicity, Hispanic or Latino, not Hispanic or Latino, and then age and gender. Now, with respect to our charge, the first one that the Chief Justice wanted us to look at was to review the juror demographic that is being collected. And I think we've done this in the first section, but I think we probably need to recommend to him or state to him what our findings are based upon our review of the current data collected. And then we need to prioritize which data should be analyzed. I think that the data collected in civil and criminal cases should be separated out. And that even though there are other demographics of jurors that are collected, such as age and gender, I think consistent with Holmes and the task force, I think we should focus on, my recommendation to the chief and to all of you all would be to focus on race, ethnicity. That's more handleable, to do, because to include all of the other demographics could be a big task. And then what I did was I continued to prioritize it so that when the veneer panel of prospective jurors are initially seated, how many total are seated? That is the number of the total veneer panel and their race and ethnicity. I think that's the first thing we probably should look at. And, anybody can jump in if they think differently. Then I think the next priority would be, because I'm going by my experience as a civil judge, usually what I do when the panel is seated, I knock out all the for cause. That is scheduling conflicts, undue hardship. But I think we need to see the total number of the stricken jurors by the judge for cause and separate that, and designate that or delineate that by race ethnicity of the jurors that are stricken, of the total number removed by the judge. The next priority, I think, would be the race and ethnicity of jurors for which peremptory challenges were exercised, and who exercised the peremptory challenges, and the race and ethnicity of the juror for which peremptory challenges were exercised. So prosecutor, defendant, that's the criminal side, and then plaintiff, defendant is the civil side. The next priority would, I think, and anybody can jump in, we want to know the strike decision of the judge after the peremptory challenge was exercised. In other words, was the juror retained or removed? The race and ethnicity of the retained or removed juror. And then the final, the last priority would be to look at the geographical differences in juror removal. That is, urban versus rural and suburban judicial districts, to look at that. And then one of the charges from the third charge from the Chief Justice is to compare the demographics of jurors to an appropriate source of demographic data, such as the U.S. We did this. I mean, I think on the report that Mr. Grealish did, we are collecting the same type of data that is collected through the U.S. Census Bureau. But I'm not clear on what the Chief Justice wants me to do, wants us to do with that comparison. I don't, I'm not clear on that. Or does he want us also to look at other sources of collecting demographic data? I'm not sure. And then the final charge is to undertake an exhaustive review of the data collection practices in other states. I did attach some law review articles regarding what data collection practices are being used in other states, the analysis of the data collected, and the results of the collection of such data. It's very interesting. And in one state in particular, North Carolina, because of the racial disparities in the death penalty cases, they passed the North Carolina Racial Justice Act, which is 2009, and they passed it in 2009. It was amended in 2012, but it's in the materials. I have the citation in the materials, which provides a relevant part that evidence relevant to establish a finding that race was a significant factor in decisions to seek or impose sentence of death in the county or prosecutorial district at the time the death sentence was sought or imposed may include statistical evidence derived from the county or prosecutorial district where the defendant was sentenced. I mean, that's within the context of a death penalty case, but for our purposes, we may want to, recommend or at least show the Chief Justice this particular statute. There may be other statutes that have been enacted. I think North Carolina, the Racial Justice Act, but that the use of the data collected has been, it has been codified so that if you substantiate there's been intentional discrimination in the exercise of peremptory challenges in North Carolina death penalty case, you can get the sentence modified. You can get it, get the sentence vacated. The use of a similar statute in Connecticut, I don't know. That may be just something to present to him, not necessarily recommend, but just to show that North Carolina, I think, is the only state that has implemented a law whereby the collection of data, you can use that statistical data to show intentional discrimination in the exercise of peremptory challenges. And that's it. And then the final thing is to issue the report.
Mr. Grealish.
Thank you. Judge Wilson, I just had a question and a comment. I'll do the comment first. Is the Chief Justice, I think, wanted the committee to look at if the census was the optimal device to compare the information to.
I'm not sure.
He presupposed that there were other options. I think he just wanted us to examine to see if there were any other options, as opposed to that, being not the right one to use.
Yeah, because number 3 says compare the demographics of jurors to an appropriate source of demographic. We've done that as vis-a-vis the U.S. Census Bureau.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know whether or not he wants us to look at other sources of demographic data. I'm not sure.
And
because we've already done 3.
Yeah. Well, when we looked at it, I contacted the National Center for State Courts, and they said the gold standard for comparative purposes is really the Census Bureau.
Okay.
Not to dissuade anyone from coming up with other things, because the census only runs every 10 years, so it may not be contemporaneous enough where there's other vehicles that kind of impute information to. So
right.
It's just a matter of whether you're comfortable with the U.S. Census or whether you want to go with some other mechanism to measure it against. And I think he just wanted just to examine if we thought there were any other sources of it. That's the impression that I got.
Okay.
And then just a couple of quick questions. One of your comments was, is it the panel composition? So when we do the collection sheet with the clerks, we indicate whether they were selected as a juror or not. So we could conceivably take the panel of people that were collected and say what the racial composition is of each panel that's collected. And the other thing that we do collect is we collect the docket number of the case. So we could literally link it back to the case and find out what the charges were on the case or what the nature of the civil action was, So we could kind of dig a little deeper at some of those things if you find that that's helpful. We have that ability to do that. And I don't know, it was very interesting when you brought it up. And the final thing was the urban versus rural. We do have a zip code of the individual. So we should be able to kind of give at least, I don't know how we would look at that, but we could certainly see what we can do with the zip code side of it.
Yeah, I think in the they actually in the articles, and you all when you read them, you can see they actually did go from geographic area to geographic area to do the collection. They did the collection of the data and then the analysis. Now, mind you, this is after the Racial Justice Act, which was passed in 2009, and the article that I am looking at where they did the analysis is 2013. So they have 4 years, right? 2009 plus 4 is 13, right? They have 4 years to look at the data. I think that we haven't had enough time to look at it, but the recommendations to the chief, or at least to demonstrate to him, illustrate to him, is, this is what was collected. This is how they collected it. These were the results.
Hey, Joe, question for you. In the criminal setting, does the data reflect the race and ethnicity of the defendant?
It does, yes. Yep.
Okay.
I thought, yeah. And what about the civil side of the plaintiff and defendant?
No.
I mean,
the criminal question is as reported by the police, not self-reported, right? So there are limitations, obviously, if the police are making a judgment as to whether the person is a person of color and whether they're Hispanic or not, because generally they're looking at the person and looking at the surname of the person and then making a decision, is the person of Latino origin or not, and what race are they? So that would be the criminal side. We don't collect it on the civil side.
Okay.
Judge Knox, I think you're on mute.
Judge Knox, you're on mute.
Thank you, everyone. I want to go back to the beginning of Judge Wilson's report, and I concur that we should be breaking down. I like her approach to how we can continue to break down the data that we have available to us with regard to race and ethnicity. I do encourage us to look at civil versus criminal so we have a better understanding of what's happening in each of the respective courts. I actually think by focusing in on race and ethnicity, which is I think what the Chief Justice wants us to do, we're also building the model to look at other demographic factors in the future. So we are actually building the model for further future review in other areas. The other thing I wanted to say is I actually agreed with almost everything Judge Wilson said with how we should continue to break the data down for this one demographic area. And particularly, I don't know how we can do this, Director Grealish, but I do think at some point we do need to have a better understanding of particularly one of the things that struck me in reading the task force report was who actually responds to the jury duty notice in urban areas versus smaller,
That's a good point.
Suburban, whatever you want to call them, areas. I do think at some point we do need to have the no-show information. And I think based on what I've read, some of the empirical data is going to show we have a higher no-show in the urban areas where we will find a higher population of Black and brown potential veneer persons. And I think we need to know a little bit more about that. So I completely, Director Grealish, if you can do all these additional breakdowns of information, that would be terrific. And does everybody agree with the recommendations that we're asking Director Grealish to do?
Absolutely.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll have to look to see the possibilities of it. We have a chart. I'm going to look for the chart as we continue the conversation, but we have a chart that shows the number of summons that went out and kind of the direction in which the summons went. You know, like the one that were undeliverable, the ones that were excused because of some permanent disability, let's say. You know, so we had a chart that kind of flows and gives you an idea, generally speaking. You know, and for example, what you'll see is like in Bridgeport, they have a very large number of undeliverables. And so the formula, when it was created to help renormalize the numbers in the area, is to address things like that, you know, like where there's an abnormal number of undeliverables, like 40%, let's say, right? Is that when they go back into the pool, it was, I think the concept was you go into the zip code of the person that you lost through the undeliverable and then re-summon from that area. In the past, what ended up happening is you would re-summon, and then eventually it would move to like the suburban areas, you know? And so you would get a disproportionate number of the suburban areas from what the actual pool was of people where they lie, you know, in general. So we have some sort of charts like that. So I'll try to find one just to show you an example later on. But I'm sure we can update that, you know, through the jury administration unit and get you something that'll depict kind of what it is location to location. To give you an idea of kind of how they have different compositions. They definitely do. You know, like I bring up Bridgeport because I remember Bridgeport had a huge undeliverable number. And every time I saw it, I was like, wow, you know, what's going on there that you have so many undeliverables. But we can certainly get that. And I can give you an older version of it first, just so you can get an idea. And then we can see if we can get them to produce a more contemporaneous version of it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I do think that what data census, demographic data sources we should be using is something that we are going to be moving on to with Patra Laka very shortly. But I just want to go back and make sure that we are on board, that the recommendations that Judge Wilson has made with regard to our request for a continued breakdown on the demographic information or data that we currently have. We're kind of all in agreement that whatever Director Grealish can provide to us, we are he'll look into and get it to us.
Sounds good.
Okay. Now, I noticed, Judge Wilson, you did raise the issue as to whether the U.S. Census Bureau is the appropriate source. And Director Grealish, you have indicated that it's the gold standard, but we still thought we should do our due diligence last time into determining whether that is going to be the marker that we are going to balance and check against. And I believe, Patrick Laka, you are prepared to report with regard to that issue somewhat.
Correct, Judge Knox. Uh, so if my name is Patrick Lake. I currently work in administrative services under Troy. Prior to that, I worked at the Court Support Services Division, overseeing juvenile programs and contracts. And prior to that, I worked at the Office of Policy and Management, looking at criminal justice, the functions of criminal justice agencies, and trends to inform policy. Just a little background on me, and if you'll permit me, I will share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? So I looked at alternative population sources. Primarily looked at DPH, OPM, Office of Policy and Management, and the DSDE, which is Department of Education. Basically, DPH would be our second best source. So every year, the Department of Health is statutorily mandated to produce a population estimate for the Office of Policy and Management, which they use to allocate funding, cost sharing, formula grants, things of that nature. So they use those population estimates, or that's what it's intended for. But the thing I discovered is DPH's estimate is based on the United States Census Bureau, essentially. So we go back to that source. So every year, as we know, the census does their big release. But in subsequent years, they do update that. Their population estimate program releases adjustments to the 10-year census based on immigrations, births, deaths, things of that nature. DPH takes those estimates and then compares it to the Census Bureau, make sure everything seems okay, seems normal, and makes any adjustment it needs to based on Connecticut data. But the weakness of the DPH / the 1 year population estimate is that they don't break down race, ethnicity at the town level. They just give a general population, how many people are in the town, essentially. So I guess in saying this, like, all roads kind of lead back to the Census Bureau, and for our purposes, the U.S. Census is defensible. So, in terms of its methodology, is well documented. How they collect data is well documented. So it tends to be the source that most agencies will use when doing comparisons or making formula grants or things of that nature. Similarly, CSDE, the State Department of Education, tends to use OPM formulas, which again tend to default back to census. So in short, all roads kind of lead back to the United States Census. And similar, Mr. Grealish, National Center of State Courts also recommends using census data in analysis. And I think I'll end there. Any questions? Judge Knox, you're on mute.
Thank you for the presentation. I think you may have actually done all the homework we need to do with what sources of demographic data that we need to be looking at for purposes of our charge number 3. So thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. It's only one slide, but
Judge Brown, is there anything else that you would like to add?
So, oh, Mr. Grealish, you still have something?
I found one of the charts if you would like to see it, that we did that kind of gives you a breakdown. Let me just share this screen here and you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Let me know when you can see it. Can everyone read that? Is it large enough to see or?
Yes, thank you.
So we start off with like the net summoned, and then it gets broken down into disqualifications and undeliverables. And then, so the net of these, like the people that were disqualified for, legitimate statutory reasons and undeliverables leaves the people that really are scheduled to appear to court. And then we have the ones that actually report as scheduled. And then we have no shows, and we have people that were canceled the prior night through the system. And then the people that actually reported as scheduled, some get excused initially right off the bat, and some are not excused, and some are questioned, and some are not questioned, and then some are selected and some are not selected. So it's kind of like a rudimentary view of how that whole thing flows, but we keep these for like every location when we prepare them. So you could kind of see the differences like in one. Let me just see if I have another location quickly there. Let's see. Any particular location you want to see?
About New Haven.
New Haven, sure. So you can see like the undeliverables in New Haven were 7,000, and I think the other one was like 20,000, in Bridgeport. And the schedule to appear was fairly similar, I think, but you can kind of see how it cascades similarly, and it gives you the breakdown at each level of what occurred and where people left the process.
How long is this data maintained, Mr. Grealish?
The jury unit, I think, can pull it. I wouldn't say on demand, but they could definitely pull the data for different periods of time. We define the period of time. It's a little bit cumbersome getting the information because the jury plot process isn't as clean as this shows. Like the net summoned is an example. You get people that from the prior jury year that decide to do jury service this year, and they come in, and you got people in this jury year that are at the end of the year that defer to the next year. So you've got this kind of little, so we have to really scrutinize the numbers when we do this, but we can get it. I mean, these numbers go back, I think I have them back to like 2014. And every year online, jury prints kind of the aggregate numbers for statewide. They print that stuff and they put it on the internet just to give you an idea how it lies.
Okay, thank you.
So that just gives you an idea of some of the stuff we can, if you find that helpful. There may be some differences between the locations that you'll spot, and it may be beneficial just from an analysis point of view. Maybe it'll make you want to look at something different,
Okay.
Just want to remind everyone who may not have been here or may not recall, we do not have demographic information, nor is there any means to collect demographic information to the people who are summoned, because that demographic information is information that is voluntarily given when people show for their. So while we would know the demographic populations of the various, I'll call it judicial districts or geographical areas at this time, we don't know, quite frankly, who is being summoned at any given time or what their demographics are, because it's voluntarily provided.
Well, it certainly seems clear from Mr. Lake's report that even if we were thinking about an alternative to the Census Bureau information, everything kind of goes back to that. So for lack of any better phrase, it sounds like that is the gold standard information that we're going to be utilizing. And to the extent that Mr. Grealish can come up with some of the information based on the report from Judge Wilson, I think that's going to help us to go a long way once we get that to thoroughly analyze that. And in addition, we have been provided over the past couple of weeks with other information. Judge Knox mentioned this from the beginning, obviously re-reviewing the task force report. If you haven't already done that, that would really be a great thing to do. Read the Holmes decision. I certainly have not looked at these law review articles. I think we got some information maybe as late as today. So I think those law review articles from UC Davis, University of Illinois, and Kentucky are reports that should be looked at, and maybe we can have that as a part of our discussion for the next meeting. And there was some other information that turned out, Judge Knox, that I believe was made reference to from, there was a report about guess who's coming to jury duty?
Yes. So one of the things I undertook since our last meeting, as I became more familiar with, quite frankly, the underlying issues on our charge, having read admittedly voluminous material, I felt like I was becoming more informed. But what I committed myself to doing was taking a look at our charge number 4, undertake an exhaustive review of data collection practices in other states. That's our 4th charge. So Director Grealish put me in touch with a wonderful person, director at the National Center for State Courts, who basically said, we're undertaking something that most states haven't really done. But she said, coincidentally, a Berkeley Law Review article recently issued in February 2024, entitled Guess Who's Coming to Jury Duty, does an entire analysis by state of what the states are doing to collect juror demographic data with regard to their panels. It could not be a more timely or helpful article. It's a lengthy article, and it has a ton of information on so many different states. So what I am going to do is, I also should tell you, the National Center for State Courts said they have no information as comprehensive as this law review article. The author of the article, I should get her name, Elizabeth Samel, would also be willing, I think, to talk to any of us if there's additional information we want, but we should certainly start by reading her highly comprehensive and current analysis. And we may find that we don't need to go much further. My fingers are crossed. So I'm going to get that distributed to all of you through Nicole so that you can read it. And what I am going to do is put on the agenda a discussion as to whether or not we feel that this is comprehensive and we can rely upon it, whether we need additional information in addition to this law review article, and if so, what additional information do we believe we need? And that's kind of something I'm throwing out for the entire committee to respond to.
I think that's a great idea, and thank you for doing that. Okay, so it looks like we have, we're going to have some homework for our next meeting. Does anyone else want to chime in, want to be heard today? Okay, if not, Judge Knox, our next meeting is, I don't have the date right here in front of me. It's April.
I have it. It is April 25th.
April 25th.
At 3
Okay.
p.m.
Very
Please
good.
put it on your calendars because we need it. We're a small group, so we really do rely on everybody's participation. But I think we are moving along very nicely, given all the contributions by everyone. So thank you for that. And Director Grealish, you're going to get some information to us prior to the next meeting also.
Yeah, on the stuff that Judge Wilson brought up, or are we talking about?
Whatever, yes, on whatever portion
Yeah.
of the information that Judge Wilson brought up.
Yeah, I'll see what I can get through, you know, because there's some more complicated parts, but I'll definitely get something, you know, that we can digest for the next meeting. I don't know if I can get all of the info by then, but I can definitely get some of it.
We couldn't ask for more. Get us what you're able to get us within
Okay.
that short period of time. That's
Sure.
a very reasonable request.
Thanks.
Okay. Hey, thank you all very, very much. Thank you. We'll see you in April.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.